Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along. We'll make a start. There may be other people joining us along the way. For those that don't know me, my name is Garth Sadler. I'm one of the assistant heads here at AIS. I'm also overseeing wellbeing in the secondary school. Just a few housekeeping things before we begin. We've got refreshments over here, food and drinks. Please feel free at any stage of the session just to go over and replenish your plate or replenish your glass. That's no problem at all. The bathrooms are just by the entrance to the library, so if you need to go and use those at any time, that's absolutely fine as well. I know there'll be a warning later on, but there's content later on in this presentation. If you feel it's triggering or upsetting, please feel free to leave as well. We won't be upset. So welcome. We're going to be talking about healthy minds, bright futures, building resilient teams. I'm always very mindful of the fact that working in the school, we have access to a lot of information that regular households may not. And so one of the purposes behind today was to give you guys information and access to people who hold this information about ways that you can engage with your adolescents at home. So that's what we're hoping that you get out of the session. If at any point in the session you have a burning question, please feel free to ask. We are recording the session, so just be mindful of that. At the end of the regular session, we will cut the recording and we'll have Q&A. And you can do that without inhibition. So our agenda for this evening, once I've finished introducing, we're going to hear from Bernadette and James. And they're going to be starting with what we see, what behaviours look like. They'll be giving some examples of what might be going on in our homes. We're then going to dig a bit deeper behind what we see and look at the causes of some of these behaviours in neuroscience and developing brains. I'm sure you know the adolescent brain is going through many, many changes. So understanding that can help us understand the behaviour. And then our third section will be when to worry, strategies for supporting your adolescent child. And just before I continue on, I will do introductions. We do have Bernadette Ward and James Midgley, who are our heads of student wellbeing here in the secondary school running the first section. We have Cara Lucas and Rebecca Delane up in the corner there. They will do the second section. And then Stephanie Cow and Cocking Ho over here, they will run us through the final section. And then I'll come back to your own questions at the end. Before we launch into it, I just wanted to make you aware, if you're not already, that we do have an extensive wellbeing team in the secondary school. As well as Bert and James, who I introduced before, we have along the top right there all of our heads of year from year 6 through to year 12. And they are very much the point people for looking after student wellbeing in the school. We have our counsellors who are here with us this evening, who I just introduced. And these people over here run a lot of the support services. We have our boarding coordinator, our homestay coordinator, learning support, our head of nursing, our head of inclusion, as well as myself. So all of these people work together. We have regular conversations. We share information. A lot of the challenges that our students have are found out about because we have these conversations. Different people have a different piece of the puzzle. We always make sure we bring all those pieces together to support our students as best as we can. And on that, I'm going to hand over to Bernadette and James. Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone. Thank you
very much, Garth. Thank you. Yes, Paul.
We'll just quickly run you through some of the things that as staff we see on a daily basis, and they do change a little bit depending on the year levels. So I look after year 6 to 8, and the types of cases that I would work with are students primarily who are moving from a very stable primary school classroom, and they might only have 1 or 2 key teachers, to multiple teachers. And they work out how to navigate that, navigate a larger school. Some children come from very small primary schools to our huge campus, and they find that that's a little bit challenging. At the younger year levels, assessment tasks and volume of testing can be a challenge for students as well. Working out how to effectively run a homework timetable and plan for assessment tasks, essays, working with a variety of teachers and their different personalities, working in a lot more group-orientated tasks, where again, there are many more multiple personalities to handle. We have things and issues that every school around the world is facing. One of our issues is vaping. That is a worldwide issue that is on the rise, particularly in Singapore. We have issues of friendships, and that's something that is very, very common, particularly in the younger year levels. One thing that is a little bit more common to Singapore and more common to an international school could be the issues around relocation. And particularly around this time of the year when students start to think about moving to another country or moving to another school, there is a lot of stress and distress associated with that. If they're staying and their friends are moving, they're worried about making new friends. So that's something that I think is a little bit more unique to an international school situation. We do also have cases, unfortunately, of self-harm. Not a lot in the younger year levels, but they are available, or not available, I shouldn't say available, they do occur. Okay.
Then we'll go on to the bigger students. So I look after years 9 through to year 12. So clearly this is the exam crunch time, which often is the bottlenecks in terms of stress, de-stress, aggravation for the students. But alongside that, they're also developing relationships with themselves, with their peers, getting into relationships they love, getting into relationships they perhaps don't love so much. They do share a lot with us in the corridor. One of the things we pride ourselves on is building that connection with the students from the moment they've come in. It's a good morning, hello, how are you doing? And that's not just a token gesture to well-being, that's us actually trying to build a bridge. Now they will look at us and go, and that's fine. We understand that they are teenagers. And you will have an opportunity during this presentation to cast your mind back to when you were a teenager, which perhaps wasn't that long ago. With that, we'll go to the next slide. So if you could all be really good teenagers, did you all bring a cell phone with you? Yes? Awesome. Could I ask you to take out your cell phone, which we never allow in class, and we confiscate if we see it in the corridor? If you'd be so kind to scan the beautiful QR code. I'm not trying to revoke memories of lockdown or pandemic. This is not a check-in. This is a cheeky little form to you to have a look at and just see that perhaps what you are experiencing is what we are all experiencing.
As a teenager.
As yourself.
As a parent.
As a parent, yes. So hopefully you get. Sorry, there is one more slide that I'll advance to. Okay. I'm chased down there on the sides. Okay, so I've got 2 daughters at home. One is almost a teenager. She definitely thinks she's a teenager, and certainly conflict is becoming more of a thing in our house, most definitely. I don't think anybody is, devoid of conflict. If you're devoid of conflict, we're not growing, we're not developing. It's kind of not normal to not have conflict, right? Conflict is necessary. Most people would agree. On a sliding scale. None of these are binary options. It's a sliding scale of acceptance or non-acceptance. What about my family does not argue ever? Well done. Congratulations. That's not my family. It wasn't my family when I was growing up. It's not my family when my kids are growing up. We do have constructive, mostly, arguments. And connection is more important than winning. One of the themes you'll get in this presentation, we hope, is the theme of connection with the students. And from that connection, we actually get some positive discipline from them. Now, what do you want from today's session? Hopefully on your cell phone there is a new question, which is the same as the one on the screen. Looking good, my grasp of technology is going well today. Sorry, I wrote Peace, Love and Unity, that was me. Hopefully as you enter, they will pop onto the screen. Here we go. Conflict resolution, we'll be looking at that. Enlightenment, I'm not sure. We will try. Something new, hopefully. Something new. Some insights, compassion. Yes, we have learned for that. Connection, how to generate connection. We're looking at that. How to resolve conflicts, how to appeal to the more rational parts of the brain. Dealing with sadness. Sadness, sadly, is a part of life. People who say we work in well-being, they think we do meditation every morning, some of us do, and we run around happy with big smiles on our faces. But it's not about that, is it? Because things happen. Bad things happen. Sad things happen. Well-being is about how we cope when the sad things actually happen. So hopefully, we will tick some of those boxes, and perhaps we'll have a quick look at that at the end of today's session. Thank you very much for your contributions on that slide. One thing which I've been using recently is this concept of shark music. And what it's arguing is the narrative we have in our heads as adults when we're dealing with a child or a teenager, what's going on in our heads. So this is a now famous psychological experiment where they show pictures of a beautiful forest, the sound of birds, the morning is just breaking, the sun is coming over the horizon, everybody's feeling good. We think positive thoughts and we say positive things. However, given the same seamless. Given the same picture and a different narrative, what they did, they actually played the Jaws theme tune. Okay? Right? And then they asked people to say how they felt about the image. And then what they felt about the image was that there was somebody hiding behind a tree. There was a guy with an axe in a cave just out of sight, and they couldn't see it. And this idea of shark music and what's playing in your head, I see, the more I think about it, the more I see it played out every day in the corridor, and perhaps in my behaviour as a parent. Awesome. So hearing the shark music, I heard the shark music this morning, 6:55, Sakura, my daughter, biggest one, 9, thinks she's a teenager. Get out of bed. Get out of bed. Oh, hang on, I need to be calm. Please get out of bed. And then I was, get out of bed, right? Which was not the best. But I did try the calm approach in the first place. And, you know, I see this parents' evenings, I see this on results, and that shark music is playing in parents' head. This is what happened last time. Oh, we're doing this again. Oh, you've done it again. You did this last time. Why are we doing it again this time? That sort of narrative, that shark music that plays, the more I become conscious of it, the more I hear myself actually doing it. So I think checking ourselves before we launch is a nice thing to do. Instead of saying, here we go again, you seem disappointed about the grade.
But one of the things that's really important for us is to think about how we're presenting ourselves to children and not making sure that we have our crossed arms, making sure that our body language is a little bit more open and a little bit more accepting and welcoming. Even if a child is, if you're reprimanding a child and something has gone really wrong, try and get down to their level, be a little bit more patient with them. It's hard when you're feeling very stressed and tensed. Now, the brain has two parts. Not yet. Oh, look, okay. The upstairs part of the brain and the downstairs part of the brain. And in the downstairs part of the brain, probably from my neck up to my nose, there are two main areas. So the limbic system and the brainstem. And one of the key things about the downstairs part of the brain that you can sort of relate to your home is all of the basic functions of your home are performed in the downstairs part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that is the most basic and the primal. And people's emotions through their amygdala are regulated in the downstairs part of the brain. And their fight or flight response when something goes wrong is regulated in the downstairs part. In the upstairs part, you have the cerebral cortex. And that is the part of the brain where the thinking and the planning and the creativity is done. So downstairs, your basic needs are met, the fight or flight. Upstairs, the higher order thinking. And upstairs is where the rational part of your brain should be kicking in. It should be activated. But unfortunately, in our children, the downstairs part of the brain is the one that we activate more. Because when something happens, we tend to go into command mode. As James said, do this, get out of bed, rather than try and work with the child and present them with ways that they can activate their upstairs thinking and be calmer and more rational. So James likes this little analogy of the fist. Would you like to explain?
Okay, so this is the amygdala. Okay, as we grow and develop, we get used to controlling our upstairs and our downstairs brain. We get better at it. Hopefully more rational, thinking, reflecting individuals. If you reflect back to when your children were very small, mine used to go to a very nice supermarket called Waitrose in the UK, very posh, very upmarket. She used to lay on the floor, kicking, howling, screaming, banging all the cornflakes packets to the floor. That was flipping the lid. That was upstairs not connected to downstairs. And often when kids are distressed, the upstairs has flipped and it's no longer connected to the downstairs. And no matter how many times you say stop, you say no, you say you cannot do that, all we're doing is speaking to the downstairs brain, that primal part of the brain. If we get a student that walks into my office who is clearly distressed, crying, upset, I try and use as little words as possible. I go and soothe the Maslow, really. I look for, have they eaten, have they drunk, have they slept? All the real basic things before I even go into thinking about why they're in that state. Because while they're in that flipped lid state, there's no way you can build a rational conversation with them. With teenagers, it's a bit like Escher's infinite staircase, however. And that lid, depending on their hormonal state, what's happened that day, what they've seen on Instagram, what their mate said to them at breakfast and they've been ruminated about for the last 12 hours, will go up and down, up and down, up and down. And we'll see more about that when we look at the neuroscience of the teenage brain. So flipping the lid, there's nothing wrong with actually being upset. That's the normal part of life. And that's one of the things we teach the kids. It's a normal thing. It's a normal reaction. No one wants to meditate themselves away from feeling upset. That's not good advice. Dealing with yourself, calming yourself, self-soothing, which we taught our kids when they were 2 or 3, but self-soothing now as teenagers with their emotional imbalances is what we're trying to do by appealing to that upstairs brain.
So, appealing to the upstairs brain. It is really important sometimes that we act before we think. For example, I'm from the Adelaide Hills in South Australia, and I grew up in the country. Lots of snakes everywhere. It still worries me. And so I used to watch shark music, and they used to sunbathe on my mum and dad's driveway. They still do. And quite often my sister and I would play there when we walk along. And you need that reflex action to not think, but to act before something happens. But in most situations, we don't want to act first, we want to think. And we want to make sure that when we plan a response, that response is not reactionary. And that's what James is again saying about making sure that when when we connect with someone or when we are really listening to children, we think about the basic elements, we look at those first, but then we think, how can we make sure that we are really catering to their higher needs at the same time?
So it's the first short segment, 3 main takeaways. Be careful of the sharp music playing in your brain. You are human. It will happen. No one is immune from that. Connection is far better than correction. Connection before correction. And always appeal, or try to appeal, despite the fact that the grab is waiting downstairs and you need to get you and your kids into it, to the upstairs brain. Thank you for listening. It's been a great pleasure to introduce the lovely Miss Lucas. Thank you.
I definitely need the microphone. For those of you who know me, I speak very quietly. My voice can even put kids to sleep in the so I speak very calmly. Very calmly. So I'm going to be speaking to you today about neuroscience and the developing brain. So I'll be delving a bit deeper into the science behind why our adolescents are acting this way. It really helps me to understand this in my work with our kids. But another really important part of my work with our young people is to show empathy and understanding for them. So I wanted to do an activity with you that can help to build that empathy. Okay, so I want you all to think back to when you were a teenager. What music were you into and how did it make you feel? So I was telling my colleagues before that when I was a 13-year-old, I was obsessed with garbage. Do you listen to garbage? I had posters all over the walls. I loved Shirley Manson. I was right into her and I was so passionate about it. And now, I find it really hard to stay up to date with music. I'm not that interested. I wonder if you had a similar experience when you were younger, sort of intense emotions or something. So do you remember your first crush, your first kiss? What were some of the emotions that you experienced at that time? Remember back to a time when your parents said no to you. How did that feel? I can imagine thinking back, some of those emotions that you felt were probably very, very intense when you were a teenager. And it's hard to understand that now as an adult, how intense that emotion was, but I think it's really important to put yourself back and remember those times. Okay, so I wanted to go through the brain. I know Vernon and James sort of briefed you on the upstairs and downstairs brain, but I wanted to look a bit more into that. So down in the brainstem, so as Vernon was saying, that's the survival function. So that's sort of the hunger and the fight or flight and feeling as though they're safe. The limbic system is sort of the lower midbrain area, and that deals with emotions and memory. So that's sadness, anger, excitement, and there's also memory associated in that area. So that's why often memories can bring up quite a lot of emotions. It's all sort of together in that area. And then with the upper brain, it's the neocortex and prefrontal cortex. Deals with that higher order thinking. So it's all about learning and rational thinking. Okay, so for the adolescent, so with brain development, it happens in 3 stages. There's 3 major stages throughout a person's life where the brain is developing really rapidly. And the first part is when they're a baby, they're actually in utero, and then from 0 to 3 years. But then this happens again from the ages of 10 to 13, when the brain develops really, really rapidly. The neurons are forming thousands and thousands of new connections. After the age of 13, after this development, then those neural pathways are strengthened or pruning happens, so a lot of them are lost. So at this age, that's when we really need to expose our young people to skills and activities where we want them for them to get cemented in their brain and for those neural pathways to become really strong. Okay, so this development happens in a bottom-up way. So it starts from the lower regions and then moves upwards. So the implication for this bottom-up development is that teens are more likely to view information and express information in an emotional way. They tend to trust their gut instincts and go off their gut instincts rather than more rational thinking. So they act quite emotionally at this age. And often, in a way, this is a real benefit. We do want to teach our children to really trust their guts. Sometimes our instincts are going to keep us safe, so we want them to do that in a lot of ways, but it can become quite difficult as parents to manage this. So After this brain development happens, then over time the upper cortexes ranges will start forming of more and developing more, but it's not fully developed until, research is now saying until the late 20s. So that rational thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which manages emotion regulation, is actually the last part of the brain to form. So our kids are really struggling with these high intense emotions, and then they're not knowing how to manage them as well as we can. Okay, so along with this uneven brain growth, teenagers also are dealing with lower levels of dopamine and lower levels of serotonin. So their baseline levels are lower. Saying that though, there's a part of the brain, the nucleus accumbens, which is in the mid-part area of the brain, is the reward center. And that center of the brain is very enlarged at this age. So when they do have a dopamine hit, that dopamine hit is very strong. So they feel very, very good. So they're often seeking out that sensation, seeking out that reward. So with adults, our dopamine levels are pretty stable throughout our time. So for instance, if we engage in a sort of activity that we enjoy, so I love getting a pedicure, it's my favorite thing. I could get it daily and I'd be happy and my dopamine levels would be high. If a teenager was to do that, they'll get bored within a few days. So they're going to want to seek out those novel experiences rather than those sort of routine experiences. So it's really important for us as adults to think, how do we engage them in novel experiences so they don't seek out those thrills or those risk-taking behaviours. So we want a routine environment with lots of novel experiences. The other thing is, I'm just thinking, I want to also let you know that it's a really important evolutionary function of this sort of risk-taking, seeking out novel experiences. Another thing that gives that real dopamine hit is social interactions or their anticipation of a social interaction. So possibly like anticipating seeing their crush, they're going to be really excited and happy about that. Where was I? So yeah, from an evolutionary perspective, we want them to be risk takers. We want them to seek out all these experiences and become independent and to really explore the world. So we don't want them being 40 years old, sitting at home, getting you to wash all their clothes. So we want them to be out and seeking these experiences. So it's actually a really positive thing that we need to help out our young people do it in a safe way. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. If I don't use this, can everyone hear me? Lovely. I hate using a microphone. Good evening, everyone. My name's Beck, and I'm one of the counsellors here at AIS. So I'm just going to follow on from Cara and talk about emotional development and the brain.
The camera can't hear you without the mic. Sorry.
It sounds terrible with this microphone. Okay, so changes that impact emotional functioning when your child's developing in adolescence. So the first thing is, I guess, in terms of emotional development, your teenager is going to go through extreme stages of fatigue. So we predict that teenagers are going to sleep a lot more, they're going to be more fatigued, they're going to need a higher nutritional uptake, and all of that's quite normal. Sleeping patterns. So, like I said before, teenagers typically will sleep longer, and that's because of the rapid growth development that's happening during this period. Unfortunately for some of our teenagers, they can have sleep regression during this period due to hormone changes. It can also be to psychological issues or things happening at school. So we always advise that if your teenager is experiencing sleep regression, just to unpack that with them, to make sure that you're putting in strategies to support a good sleep. So what was that?
condition?
So if they're waking up during the night, so some of the teenagers that we work with as counsellors will come to us and say, "Oh, I'm waking up at 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm not going back to sleep till 6 and mum's waking me at 6:30. So it's about, I guess, putting things in place to support them having that continuous sleep. Hormone changes, which is pretty self-explanatory. Cognitive changes, which Cara went through. Now, complex social interactions. So as Bern and Duncan mentioned, a lot of the referrals that they receive as head of wellbeing are in relation to friendship concerns and conflict. So from year 6 especially, we find that our young people are really struggling to engage in these more complex social interactions, and we really have to help them and step them through how to resolve conflict or overcome arguments with their peers. And our Strive programs really target this as well, which is great. The development of identity. So Erickson spoke a lot about identity and identified the different stages that an individual goes through with establishing their identity. He talks about from the ages of 12 to 17, identity versus confusion. So here he's talking about a young people's identity really coming out, but also in the teenage years, a young person is exploring I guess their occupation and what they'll do when they finish school and how that fits in with their identity. So you'll often find that you'll be engaging with your child in these discussions around what will you do when you're older, or mum and dad, I don't know what I want to do, or I'm looking at this. And this is all really normal. So please engage in those discussions with your teenager. So unfortunately, your teenager won't need you as much, and they're going to naturally want to spend time with their friends. They'll still need you, but not how they needed you when they were 5. And this is all really normal. You'll often have to pick up the pieces if they've had a friendship breakdown, or they've broken up with their girlfriend or boyfriend, or they're having conflict with the teacher at school. So even though they want that independence, their emotional maturity still warrants a lot of guidance through this period and a lot of scaffolding to manage these complex situations. So always make time during the week to talk to your teenager, even if it's going for a hot chocolate with them and just unpacking what's happening with them. And I think a common theme that's been spoken about through this evening is connection. And it's probably the biggest thing it's the biggest protective factor you can have with your teenager. Okay, so nurturing your teenager's brain. So first and foremost, building a balanced home life. So loving your child, telling your child you love them unconditionally, that they can call you if they're good, they can call you if they're not, and they can tell you things that are happening for them and they won't get into trouble. But it's also about setting boundaries. So you can love your teenager, but they need boundaries. And it's important, I guess, that you establish those within the home setting. Providing healthy experiences. So your children will learn healthy habits, including exercise and what they eat, through yourselves. So get your child cooking, talk about nutritional intake. Don't talk about calories, talk about food that fuels you. So come from a health perspective with your teenager and incorporate that meal planning and food prep into your daily routine. I know sometimes that's really tricky when we have helpers but in Singapore, but it's really important during this period. We've spoken about good sleep habits, so please don't let your teenager take their phone to bed with them. Often when we have teenagers come to us and we see them have disrupted sleep, it's because of technology. So have a cut-off for technology, but it's really important that you model that too. You can tell your teenager not to take their phone into their room and be scrolling, but if you're modelling that, it's not really setting a good example. So talking about reading books, talking about calming music, talking about having a really good evening routine, and as a family, putting devices somewhere that's not near the room. Encourage an active lifestyle. So I guess an active teenager is a good thing. And I don't mean just physically active, cognitively active too. So get them into clubs. We offer so many CCAs here, and it's really important for cognitive development that kids are moving, they're challenging themselves, and they're trying new things. So keep them active. Offer healthy options, we've spoken about. So develop a plan to manage stress. So often when teenagers come to visit one of the counsellors, it's in relation to excessive stress and big emotional outbursts. So what we'll do is we'll sit with that young person and we'll unpack what's causing them stress, and then we'll develop a bit of a stress management plan for them. So these key skills can definitely be implemented within the family home. So talking to your teenager about managing big emotions, going to a yoga class with them, teaching them about meditation and calming breathing. All of these things, if they're taught from a young age, can really support teenage emotional development. And protect the brain from injury. So I guess what we're talking about here is drug and alcohol use. So obviously drug use isn't something that we see in Singapore, or it's very rare. But talking to a teenager about the impacts of making poor choices with alcohol and how their brain's still developing, and that can very much affect their cognitive development. So don't expect your teenager to just know that. Engage in those conversations and say to them, if you do this when you're a teenager, it's going to impact your cognitive development, and it's going to have long-term implications. Sorry guys. Okay, last from me. So beneath every behaviour there is a feeling, and beneath each feeling is a need. And when we meet that need rather than focus on the behaviour, we begin to deal with the cause, not the symptom. So this is really going back to connection. I think James spoke very well about often we're responsive to a behaviour, but there's always an underlying cause to a behaviour. So our children come home, they can be moody and grumpy and be set off at the slightest thing. And it's not what you've said or what you've told them to eat for dinner, it's the 5 things that have happened during the day to them. And they're still learning how to regulate their emotions. So making time to sit down, or saying to your teenager, I can see you're really stressed, would you like to go for a walk with me? If you've got a car, let's go for a drive to the beach and take the dog. Whatever your context is, making sure you're present and make sure you're unpacking what's happening for them and having that connection. Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to pass over to Steph, one of our other counsellors. Thanks.
Thanks, Beck. It's really nice to kind of come up here because I'm normally based in elementary, so it's really lovely to kind of pop up here because one of my passions actually lies in adolescence and anxiety. So I'll try to cover as much as I can. And again, as a parent and also as an educator, we do kind of see our students and and we do collect a lot of information from our children. Key thing is because we are constantly checking in on them to make sure that they're all right in terms of well-being, physical health, and mental health as well. But in times when we collect all this information, there will be times that we kind of wonder, is this something that I start to worry about, or is it something that's part of growing up? So just kind of have a quick run through is that typical adolescent behaviors is that they do tend to withdraw from family because they prefer to spend more time with their friends. And that's again a very normal and very healthy thing to do. Because where they are connecting is, they find that their friends have a better understanding of them. Okay? And they have similar interests or similar concerns due to the age that they're growing up in and the influence that they're also gathering from social media or mass media. So they do feel a lot more connection with their friends. Yeah? And in terms of losing temper, it is quite common again. 2 things. First is that when it comes to losing temper with their parents, they do know that, if I do lose my temper, Mom and Dad will always forgive me. Okay? And this is one thing that they do actually learn. This is where they start to learn to say no. And they can't test it on their friends because their friends will run away. So they do normally do it with parents. So this is again another common and really healthy practice. Not that it's the nicest, but it's quite common. The second thing is because they are still developing their brain, so they are still trying to learn how to regulate their emotions. So this is something that they are still learning and building, but with time they do get better. Okay, like look at all of us. We are all right. Moving on from childhood likes to being teen pursuits. Of course, it's very normal. You change your likes and dislikes. You change as you grow. Your friends influence you. The mass media and social media do influence you. So of course, let's say as a child, I might love playing with Barbie dolls. As I grow up, maybe that will change into something else. Yeah? In terms of struggling to complete undesired tasks, again, it's not just teenagers. As adults, we do struggle with that. When it's something that we're not interested in, we would do it because we know the benefits of it. But as a child, they are still learning how to organize those thoughts because these are called executive functioning skills. They haven't developed it fully. But with time, they will, and they will come to that point that they are able to. When it comes to certain parts where we start picking up these key areas and start to kind of monitor a bit more closely, is when you notice that your child is not just withdrawing from family gatherings, but it's also from friends and other form of social connection. But this is the important part when it comes to adolescence, because that's where they start building their identity, their sense of belonging. And if they actually lose that connection, that's where they start actually, they will go down the path where they start mulling on certain concerns and they do not get out from it. And they stop communication, and that's the worry. Yeah. Then they frequently argue with adults or purposely breaking rules or displaying aggressive behavior. Again, on top of just the difficulty in regulating their emotions, that's another clear sign that they're actually going through something, but at the same time, being in this developmental stage, they feel that they are in control and they can be independent and I can manage this. And the thought and the fact that they actually still need that support and help, they tend to still draw away from it because they feel that I can do it, I can be on my own. But in actual fact, because their brain is still developing, they are unable to do so yet. Yeah? Losing interest in favorite activities and not replacing it with anything else. And when it comes to children at this age, hobbies and things that they like to do give them a sense of meaning, give them a sense of, I belong here, I'm doing it with my group of friends, that this is our common interest. That's the sense of connection. But if they don't have that, again, that's another red flag. Okay? Difficulty remaining focused and maintaining concentration across a variety of tasks and settings. So basically, it's even covering things that they used to like, or they still like, but they're losing focus and motivation for it. So again, there's less meaning to life, and that's something that we want to be picking up on. Yeah? Again, all these always come with protective factors and risk factors. When it comes to protective factors, it will be things that are helpful, healthy, and risk factors will be things that are harmful. When it comes to protective factors, as we can all see here, healthy self-care practices. Of course, that is a protective factor. It will help a child grow, help a child have positive and healthy thoughts, and very good in regulating their emotions, or even in when it comes to challenging cognitive distortions. And cognitive distortions is something that we all go through, even as adults, and there are 15 of them. And being a teenager, they go through that a lot in a single day. Yeah? Positive coping skills, of course, when it comes to coping, we need to make sure that we cope in the sense of problem focus. When there's a problem, we focus on finding out how can I work through this, who can help me, where can I go to. But the problem is when the child starts to cope in a way of avoidance, pretending that it's not there, or I'll deal with it later, or even not having the thought of wanting to go ask for help. Sense of belonging in school and community. Of course, that's the anchor for them. That sense of belonging is very important for them because it's a sense of identity as well. Yeah? Regular school attendance and academic engagement. These are all protective factors. Yeah? But when it comes to risk factors, any adverse childhood experiences, any form of neglect or abuse, yeah? Challenges with peers in school. And we're talking about relationship not just with friends, romantic relationships because they start building that, and also when it comes to bullying. And when it comes to bullying, it's just not face-to-face. It's also online bullying. And there's this new type of bullying where children actually start building up, like let's say, 2 accounts, let's say on Instagram. Yeah, they build up 2 accounts. One is their personal, and one is someone that they kind of build up as it can be anyone else. And they actually use the other account to self-bully. That is a form of bullying as well. And that actually came up in the recent research. So if you're interested, go read up about it. History of family, mental illness, or addiction. Yeah, those are risk factors as well. Okay, huge risk factor as well. When it comes to poverty, exposure to violence in school or community, because it can cause very common PTSD. The PTSD doesn't only come by when it comes to a person going on combat. It can be very severe, significant change to an environment, and it's affecting the person. Okay? So these are really good factors to actually look out for. So I'll try to apply this into, let's say, the first part will be anxiety. Anxiety is a condition that doesn't really get looked at a lot. And the key thing is it should be looked at a lot as well, because anxiety is normally the primary mental health condition that if you do not intervene or you do not actually kind of run any strategies or any therapy as soon as you can, it can lead to secondary conditions. And those secondary conditions, when it kind of starts appearing, that's when you notice or a person will start getting diagnosis of a depression, eating disorder, or even going down the path of self-harming or suicide ideation. So these are secondary conditions. Yeah? And it normally, not at all times, most of the time, it stems from anxiety. Yeah? So let's quickly run through the risk factors. Of course, academic pressure when it's coming around the time of exams or assignments due, it does happen. But again, a lot of times as a counselor, we do help children learn how to manage their time, organize their work, because again, their executive functioning skills are not fully developed, so those skills are not fully developed either. Social situations like friendship, bullying, all these are risk factors. Family conflict, be it whether they are directly involved or not. High expectations, be it from themselves or from social media, from friends or family. Poor physical health, let's say if they have a long-term illness, that can be a risk factor as well. Poor behavior. This is a bit complex because let's say even if a child were to misbehave, yeah, they do not normally behave quite well. And there are times when they feel that there's a need to kind of come out from that pattern or change. But sometimes when they're already in that situation and having got that label or name, they find it very tricky to come out from that situation. So it's that vicious cycle that they get kind of stuck into. And in those instances, it can also be a risk factor for anxiety. When it comes to moving, it's not just moving countries, moving home, moving houses, it's also the transition of losing friends, friends moving and coming and going, or even in terms of when, let's say for adolescents or children, they can get very attached to their pets. And when you move, sometimes you can't really bring your pets. So that's another factor that can be an add-on factor for anxiety. So certain signs and symptoms, as you can see there, is quite physical, yeah? And especially lack of energy. When a person is quite anxious, normally it does affect their sleep pattern. So that comes hand in hand as to why they lack energy and they tend to be very tired. Feeling sick and headaches, then of course, in worst case scenarios, it can actually lead to panic attacks. Yeah? And when it's panic attack, that's when you really need to make sure that you get medical support as soon as you can. Depression is quite similar to anxiety. Academic struggles, bullying, relationship, poor behavior, poor physical health, bereavement. That is not just about losing someone significant. It's also ending of a relationship. And adolescents normally they start developing deeper levels of romantic relationship. And when the relationship does not work out, it does affect them similar to as if they're experiencing bereavement. Parental divorce and also moving in terms of transition like I've explained earlier. So signs and symptoms would be their coping mechanism. Like I've mentioned earlier, if they are coping in terms of problem solving or emotion focus, that's great because they're focusing on what can I do now or what can I do to kind of relieve that tension. Then I think about how to problem solve. But the problem actually starts when they start avoiding. That is a really unhealthy coping mechanism. No apparent reason, but there is a decline in their academic performance. Continuous low mood, and that low mood is really consistent and continuous for at least 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah? Onset of developing secondary condition. This alone, this is a secondary condition. Yeah. And of course, it will be affecting their daily life activities, and that's when they will need more support and if not professional. Next part will be eating disorder. Of course, when there's a history of being criticized or mentioned about their size or their weight, or they have been actually abused before or suffered severe trauma in childhood, or having a family that have a history of eating disorder, depression, or even substance abuse. Social media plays a huge role when it comes to adolescents feeling the need to look a certain way, and it's very much based on perceptions and what is pretty, what's thin, what's tall. It's all based on perception, but the social media do skew it to a very extreme way. And adolescents, unfortunately, due to the brain still developing, they are not able to make that connection. Having anxiety, low self-esteem, and obsessive or perfectionistic personality. But in actual fact, they all know it's like textbook answer, nothing is perfect, but there's still that need to kind of achieve it. Again, it has a lot to do with social media or mass media. So some of the signs and symptoms will be dramatic weight loss, and they tend to not be very honest with their food intake. They won't tell you how much they've eaten, when they have eaten, or they will eat a lot of food at a very quick, in a short amount of time. Yeah, and then they will frequently visit the bathroom. And if you notice frequent visits to the bathroom, you might also start noticing discoloration of the teeth because of regurgitation of the food. Due to the acid, it does affect the teeth. And you will also notice some cuts on the knuckles. Because as they try to make themselves sick, that action, sometimes they accidentally cut their own knuckles on the teeth. Yeah? They tend to be quite anxious, they are obsessively exercising, sticking to very strict, rigid diet, and also exercise routine. Cutting food into small pieces and kind of spreading it around the plate to kind of make it seem like they have been eating. And moving the food around when in actual fact they haven't touched much of the food. Avoiding eating with others or eating in secret. Constant check and compare of their weight or how they look. And of course, as a result of it, it will lead to quite severe physical health problems. Most of the common ones will be gastrointestinal. And some of them will get very early on migraines. I'll pass the floor to Kayla, who will cover a bit more.
Can you all hear me? Okay, so yeah, before I change the slide, just like to remind all present, right, if you are feeling uncomfortable with the topics I'll be talking about after this, please feel free to step out, step away, and maybe even have a drink. Right, we're talking about attending to the basic needs first, right, before higher order needs. Okay, so this is getting more and more severe in terms of like what to worry, and I'd like to talk about non-suicidal self-injury. There are typically a few reasons or risk factors, right, that stand out when it comes to non-suicidal self-injury. One of it is emotional distress. Right? You have heard how the teenage brain develops, right? So emotions play a very big part, and sometimes if they are not able to regulate, they can take it out in this way, right? They can injure themselves as a way of control, as a way of release. Okay? And the other thing is feelings of inadequacy. So youths who basically show signs of low self-esteem, or they are judging themselves, they are saying they are worthless, for example, they could engage in this as well. Okay? And you also heard about how peers are important, how social relationships are important earlier, right? That can be a very big source of distress for them, right? And if they're not able to handle, for example, the change in environment, change of the school, or peers are not accepting them, let's say they're being bullied, they're being ostracized, right? These things actually are very, very high risk factors. Okay, and of course relationships, right? I think just now Kara asked us to remember like our first kiss, how intense it was, the emotions, right? So when relationships end, especially like boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, right? Yeah, they cannot see, they are not able to see like what's ahead, and that you know, they might have other relationships, they might have other candidates coming along. Okay. Right. So those are a few risk factors that are really salient when it comes to youth who engage in non-suicidal self-injury. Let's take a look at the signs and symptoms. Usually it will come out as unexplained injuries. So they have frequent accidents and mishaps that they are not able to explain. They just say, oh yeah, it's PE class again, you know, and I keep tripping, for example, right? Or it could be art classes, right? And then the tools are just too sharp, or yeah, things like that. And the other thing to look out for is, for example, when they keep themselves fully covered, long sleeve shirts, pants all the time, even when it's really warm, right? It could be hiding what they're doing. Okay. And sometimes it gets really tricky because in an attempt to hide the self-injury, they can do so at places like near where the underwear, where the strap is. Yeah. So other things to look out for would be, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, right? If your child seems to be like always saying that they are worthless, they're not good enough, you know, they'll never amount to anything, or they are showing low self-esteem. Okay. Yeah. So. Okay, and the next thing will be if you notice suicidal ideation. So let's look at some of the risk factors. The primary factors to look out for is actually like past attempts, right? That puts anyone at a very high risk if they have tried to attempt suicide before. And I think it was mentioned earlier as well, you know, abuse, neglect, the impact on the growing brain is very substantial. So it can actually result in them not viewing their lives as worthy. Okay. Otherwise, there could be like mental health conditions like depression, or being diagnosed with a serious medical condition. Yeah. So if they find that, you know, for example, they have a debilitating condition, they are, okay, maybe I can give an example. Last time, there was a student, not in this school, but another school, he had a spine condition, so he's not able to stand up straight, and then he was ostracized and he couldn't do any sports, right? Yeah. So that actually led him to have a lot of suicidal ideation. Okay. And okay, moving on, bullying and discrimination. We've already said how important friendship groups are, social relationships are for teenagers and adolescents, right? So if they are not able to fit in, especially to new environments, right? Yeah, then it could really cause them, push them towards this direction. Yeah. And I think it was mentioned as well, bereavement, right? Like, especially if their peer or loved one, let's say a relative, has died by suicide, it is actually a very high risk factor. Okay, so some of the signs and symptoms will be quite overt, like them threatening to hurt or harm themselves, right? Or it could be a little more subtle. It could be writing notes. It could be making preparations like farewells and giving away the possessions. Okay, and another sign would be to look out for is if they have gone through any recent trauma or significant loss, could be a friend or relative. Sometimes they talk about feelings of hopelessness and there's no purpose, they don't know what to do, right? Yeah, that could be another thing to look for. Okay. Yeah, oh, and okay, this point about being a burden or nuisance to others, okay, this is related to depression also. They feel very guilty, right? They think that they are a burden, that nobody actually really needs them, and they're just making making everybody's life miserable. Things like that. Yeah, and of course, withdrawal, isolation from their friends, their peer groups, and their family members, their relatives. Right? Another overt sign is actually when there are drastic changes. You know, like if the youth used to be very talkative or like very outgoing, but then he suddenly starts withdrawing, he suddenly starts avoiding people, he gives up, let's say, leadership positions and such. Okay, so moving on to general strategies for us. Okay, I think actually Beck has mentioned a lot of these points in green, and these are really upstream practices. These are preventative practices. Right? We talk about connecting with your child, so that you build this relationship, build this bond, and you allow them to see that they can always come to you, whether it's for something good or not. Right? And then encouraging all the healthy habits, about exercise, about sleep, about what they eat, nutritious meals, right? The other thing we could do is really to stay involved in their lives as parents. So connect with school, connect with us, connect with their friends, CCAs, and staying involved. I think Beck already said as well, the technology use, right? And know what they're doing online. Of course, not spy on them, but then, yeah, just be aware. Let's say the people they follow. For example, if they are following someone who is known to have an eating disorder, or someone who is like really depressed, right? So to look out for these things, and be a role model, like demonstrating the positive behaviors. It was earlier said, right? Coming up with a plan as a family to handle stress, right? And how the family can plan to eat properly as well. Things like that. Yeah, how to cope. You will be the best role model. How you cope with major events that disrupt your lives, with tragedies that all of us face, right? Okay. So moving on to the orange points, this is more for what was identified just now about things to worry specifically, like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, non-suicidal self-injury, and then suicidal ideation. Okay, communication still goes back to the point of connecting with them, right? So, but if you notice any of those signs and symptoms that were discussed earlier, be open, talk to them about it. So find a conducive place, find a time that's good for both of you where you won't be interrupted, right? And sit them down properly, ensure they are comfortable. If they are willing to open up to you, please be non-judgmental, right? I think it's really difficult for parents, especially if you know your child is harming himself, herself, right? Or thinking that life is not worth living. Yeah. So once again, we have to be calm. We have to be aware of the narrative that's going on in our minds, as James has said at the start of the presentation, right? And then apply active listening, right? So really listen without interrupting, check back with them, check their feelings. And because adolescents and teenagers, they really want to be independent and they really like to have autonomy, right? We would actually suggest giving them self-help strategies rather than like just, okay, I need to book an appointment for you to see a psychologist, counselor, right? You can actually try self-help strategies first. It really tells them that you are trusting them, right? There's the opportunity for them to be independent, to practice autonomy. Yeah, but of course, this is also relative, right? If they're really suffering, if they are really in distress, then you should seek professional help. Okay, and otherwise, if you are feeling overwhelmed yourself because you could be actually coping with something else, all of us face different things, right? Just please go ahead and seek professional help. Okay, and the points in red are even more specific to certain conditions, like when a panic attack episode happens for a youth with anxiety, right? It's important to check the location, meaning go to a place where they are much more comfortable, where maybe it's not so crowded, not so stressful, right? They don't feel like people are judging them. Yeah. And then provide the support needed. So earlier it was mentioned also, practicing deep breathing, for example. It would be good if you can do that with them. And then later on referring them to a medical professionals. Right? So for the case of non-suicidal self-injury, right? Self-harm. Let me make a distinction first. So the difference between non-suicidal self-harm and suicidal ideation, right? Sometimes actually having self-harm helps them, as in they don't want to end their lives, and it's a way of relief, right? Because they're facing a lot of emotional distress, they are out of control, and that's how they can express it, right? So that's the difference. But whether it's self-harm or suicidal ideation, please don't ignore their injuries, right? While we say, communicate with them, sit down properly. If you notice injuries and it's bleeding, please attend to the injury first, right? Sometimes we get very flustered, right? When we see that, and we can't compose ourselves, right? So, but please remain calm and address the injuries first. If necessary, please refer them to a medical professional. Okay. Which is the next point also. Yeah. Depending on the injury, you may need to call the emergency services. Okay, so we have spoken a lot about youth. Okay, I think it's really important for us as parents, right, to take care of ourselves first. And I remember going on planes, and they always say, what do they say about the oxygen mask? When it drops, put it on yourself first. Otherwise, if you are dizzy, if you are disorientated, you won't be able to help anyone else. Right? So make sure you care for yourself and build up healthy habits as a family. Right? If you need, please come and connect with us. Right? We can definitely have conversations about this. With that, I end the presentation.